Well, good evening, this is Houndog Steve wishing you a very pleasant evening, and I'd just like to make a quick comment as maybe a bit of an addendum to the last video about the whole concept of testing and false positives in this situation. There has been so many false positives, and in fact, well, I'll play that little clip again of Debra Birx saying up to 50% of all tests are false positive. And I came across another letter the other day in RT and covering exactly the same subject. And why I wanted to cover this, because as a small businessman myself, I am absolutely scared to death of being caught up in this, of somebody who has come in my store and has been contact traced with a false positive, and I end up being in quarantine for 2 weeks based on a false positive. And now in the letter, or the piece that's on RT, you know, the rugby team did get a retest and it turned out that only one of them was positive and not the 8. But you know, is there any guarantee? There's certainly going to be some disruption in your life through a false positive. And actually I did have a chap come in my store, and he was telling me a story of they were driving back from Toronto, and they got a phone call, and of course it was like, oh, I have some terrible news for you, don't be worried, but you have tested positive, and you should go straight home, don't go to any stores, and wait for further instructions. Well, this chap's wife nearly had a heart attack. She already is, she has a heart condition anyways, and of course she went into a total tailspin. You know, they just visited the grandchildren, so she was concerned about that situation, and it actually took several days for them to be recontacted. They were given some instructions, and then several days after that they were contacted again, and she was told that, it was a mistake. Well, they had been worried to death. This could have actually killed this woman, the stress that it put on her of having a false positive. And of course, if you run a business, my business would come to a grinding halt. All of the appointments that I booked would suddenly have to be rearranged, and of course I would be into an immediate loss of income situation, as many other businesses would. So this is such a difficult situation. It puts such pressure on individuals. If there happens to be a false positive, there has to be either a guarantee that there is a 99.9% accurate test, or that if you do get a positive test back, that you are immediately retested to make sure that this is the correct result. Anyway, let's just pop over and read this article, and I'll come back and do a quick wrap up. Okie dokie, here we go. And this is from RT. The problem of false positives from CV tests means UK is inflating its numbers and taking wrong decisions. And this is by Rob Lyons, who's a UK journalist specialising in science, environmental and health issues. When 7 staff at a Scottish football club tested positive for CV, alarm bells went off. But really alarming was when 6 of those results turned out to be wrong. Such inaccurate tests are exaggerating the problem. Last weekend, at very short notice, the UK reintroduced quarantine measures for people arriving from Spain. For those already in Spain, or for whom it was too late to postpone their trip. The decision was very inconvenient. For those who can't work at home, when they returned, it may mean missing out on wages for the 2 weeks they will have to spend in isolation when they get back. But what if the apparent rise in cases has been exaggerated by seemingly small flaws with testing? The potential for problems was illustrated by Scottish football team St Mirren last week. The club, based in Paisley, a town just west of Glasgow, reported 7 positive test results for CV among its staff. Alarm bells went off about what this might mean for the new Scottish football season. But this cluster was a mirage. When the 7 people were retested using a more accurate method, just one of them was found to be CV positive. In Spain, half of the reported cases have been in people who had no symptoms. We know that many people who test positive never suffer any symptoms, but what if many of these people don't have CV at all? If that sounds implausible, it's important to know that tests are not perfect. There are currently two kinds of tests to see if you have the disease. One kind, the molecular real-time polymerase chain reaction, the RT-PCR test, looks for genetic material from the virus. This kind seems to be very accurate, but it's expensive and time-consuming. The other kind, the antigen test, detects specific proteins on the surface of the virus. This is quicker, cheaper and easier, but it's much less accurate. In developed countries, RT-PCR testing is the norm, but poorer countries may have to make do with antigen testing. The difficulty at the moment is that there are relatively few cases of CV in the community, but more and more testing is being done. So even if the RT-PCR test has a high specificity, that is, a tiny fraction of the test results are false positives, the number could actually be quite significant. For example, let's say that 99% of the time a test correctly identifies someone without the disease as negative. Just 0.1% of tests produce false positives. Recently in the UK, it was estimated that 0.04% of people had the virus outside of care homes and hospitals. So if we tested 10,000 people, we should find 4 cases of CV on average. Of the 9,996 other people tested in this hypothetical example, 0.1% who don't have the virus would also test positive. That's 9.996. In other words, 10 people. So even if the test is very accurate indeed, we could easily end up with 4 positive tests from people who really do have the virus and 10 false positives from people who don't. For any particular individual, the chances of the test being a false positive is small, but when we look at the big picture, we could easily be fooled into thinking that there are many more cases than there really are. Indeed, with a test accuracy of 99.9%, if you tested 1 million people, none of whom actually had the disease, you would produce 1,000 positive results, and for tests with less accuracy, as with St Mirren FC, the situation could be even worse. And this is what I've been saying, that the effects are so devastating. When you test positive, the false positive situation has to be resolved. The UK government has now performed nearly 11 million tests. Could there be 11,000 cases that are simply a mistake? In turn, that means governments and other authorities might be introducing additional restrictions on people's lives that are actually unnecessary. The problem of false positives is much less significant when the disease really is in wide circulation. It doesn't change the picture much for the period from mid-March through to the start of June. In any event, in the UK at least, there was very little testing capacity thanks to the jaw-dropping incompetence of bodies like Public Health England. Let's look at the latest figures. On Sunday, July the 26th, for example, 142,954 tests were processed. Of these, 747 were found to be positive. If 0.1% of the tests are false positives, we would expect 142 of those 747 positives to be false. If the test turns out to be slightly less accurate, perhaps only 99.5% accurate, which still seems very good, then 710, almost all reported positives, could be false. We should also bear in mind when trying to assess the overall situation that there will be some false negatives. There will also be people who don't show symptoms, who do have the virus and never get tested. But this understanding shows that we do need to be careful about reading too much into every small blip in the numbers of cases. We should be particularly skeptical about imposing new restrictions like mandatory quarantine, and if we rely solely on these tests, we could have the crazy situation where CV apparently never disappears even when nobody has got it. And that, my friends, is a very interesting point. Now, I'm hoping that made you appreciate that even small inaccuracies in the testing process can lead to quite a lot of false positives. And again, these people are all individuals. This is not just some lump number of A, B, C, D and E. These are real people with real lives, with real things going on in their life, and of course in the world that we live in, which is seamless. You know, really, we're at the point in our society, in our world, where you cannot miss a beat because you've fallen behind. Even treading water is fatal in our society, because the speed with which inflation is affecting the cost of goods means that everybody has to be on their toes, whether they're as an investor, or if their investments are falling short, what are they going to do to replace that? So yes, false positives are a very dangerous thing, and they have to be, you know, the government, if they're going to play these games, if they're going to do this kind of stuff, they have to ensure accuracy. And if they cannot ensure 100% accuracy, that there isn't going to be this, you know, sledgehammer fall on the individual where they're absolutely devastated after we've just gone through a situation where just about all of us have lost 12 weeks of income. Okay, so yes, I hope we'll bear this in mind. I hope that somebody's listening to this, and that yes, we get some guarantee of accuracy, or at least some understanding that there are real lives being affected in real ways when you get a false negatives, of course, don't count for anything, but a false positive can be devastating. Okay, just a quick note there, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below. And in the meantime, this is Hamburg Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we'll talk very, very shortly. You take care now. See ya. Bye.